Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
Don't you understand, George? It's because you were not born.
Film church.
Well, a boy's best friend is his mother.
What gift do you think a good servant has that separates them from the others? It's the gift of anticipation. And I'm a good servant. I'm better than good. I'm the best. I'm the perfect servant. I know when they'll be hungry and the food is ready. I know when they'll be tired and the bed is turned down. I know it before they know it themselves.
Hello, and welcome to Film Church Radio, the podcast that treats cinema as a religion. It's Sunday. I am Brandon.
And I am Lewis.
He's back! And we're here to talk about movies. Each week, except for the last 3 weeks, Lewis and I alternate picking a film for us both to watch and discuss. But we're doing it different again today. We've got Zach back, and
Hello.
He has brought a film for us to worship. What is the film, Zach?
The film that I brought today is Gosford Park, from 2001, directed by Robert Altman.
Sweet. Thank you for bringing this to us. Is this an old favorite of yours? One that you've seen several times?
Yes. This is the first Altman film that I ever saw. My parents were big Altman fans, and they've been watching his films since the 70s. And this came out around the time I was kind of pinned my key years of getting into movies as being like between 1999 and 2003. Like that chunk right there is like a lot of important films to me personally. And so this is interesting because earlier today I was kind of getting mentally prepared for this. And I was like, why did I pick this movie? Because I have other Altman films that I would say I like more than this. There are other films from the year 2001 that I like more than this. But as my introduction to Altman, who's kind of an important director to me, it felt like something special to share. And I kind of liked also that international sort of thing, since Lewis is now relocated to England, and that this is kind of a cross-cultural film, right? It's an American filmmaker making a British movie. And there's elements of that in there, of the American who's sort of lost and confused about this lost British culture.
Yeah, that's awesome. You literally touched on exactly what I was hoping you would touch on, which was, why did you pick it?
Yeah, I mean, I had to think of it, but I had to kind of think hard. It's like, why did I pick this? But
yeah, nice. Of course, you got to listen to the end of the episode if you want to know what we're watching next week, because every Sunday we've got a different film. And it's going to be Lewis's pick next week, so excited to find out what the heck it's going to be. Of course, we want to say thanks to everybody who has been listening to the show. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that bell on Spotify to be notified every Sunday. We're on all good podcast platforms. But yeah, thank you to everybody who's been listening to the show and following it. Please share it with your friends. Let them know that they can find us. If you just go to filmchurchradio.com, that pushes you to our Spotify site where it's got all the different podcast platforms you can listen to us on. We're also on social media at Film Church Radio. And yeah, if you could leave us a comment and review, that would be helpful. And yeah, thanks everyone. It's time to worship now. Well, pre-worship. So before we discuss the film, we're going to have our little trailer section where we talk about other things, other films, other things, not necessarily related to our feature presentation show, which is Gosford Park. But yeah, I think we're just gonna we don't have specific films we're gonna talk about, where we're just gonna kind of have a little chat about maybe the state of the movie industry right now, like what's going on with the writer's strike and the actor's strike. And I did watch all of those Hobbit videos that you told me to, Zach.
Yeah.
Which has all of the all the craziness of the actors strike that was going on in New Zealand at the time, which was crazy, and how it did not turn out well for them at all.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually watched all those videos twice.
Yeah. I mean, those are that's a pretty concise series. Those 3 videos, and I think I may have done the same thing. I remember watching them as they were coming out. So because they didn't all drop at once, it was like once a week or something like that. I don't remember.
Yeah.
And then once they were all out, I remember having to. I just was like, I gotta watch them all in one sit through,
Yeah.
to get the full experience.
What's her name again? Just to shout out her channel.
Lindsay Ellis. I don't think
Okay.
she updates too often anymore.
But she's got very good, in-depth, video essays.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically a documentary that she made, but
yeah, she has a lot of video essays. So some of it doesn't necessarily cross with my interests. Like she's done a lot of stuff about some of the Disney Renaissance musicals, which I'm kind of like, but they're still interesting, subjects that she kind of gets into. And then she has a couple of videos like that Hobbit one that are just knocking it out of the park,
Yeah. I know earlier this summer, Lewis, you tweeted that. I can't remember exactly what you tweeted, but it was something like, does anyone else feel like this is the summer that will make or break movies?
Yeah.
Or something?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How do you feel now that we're reaching the end of the summer?
I feel like it's a pivotal time. I mean, if we look back at, post-COVID and the kind of coming back to the cinema, and it's been kind of film after film that's been touted as saving the cinema experience, which is great, which is rightly so. But the trouble with those is that the films are coming, within months of each other. So you hit a lull, the cinemas kind of have to fight that back and then come up with new ways. Barbie and Oppenheimer coming out at the same time has been, all I've seen is record-breaking numbers from theatre chains across the UK and the US.
Yeah.
Because of that, which is incredible. The worry now is how do we sustain that? How do we make sure?
Because that's a hard business to keep just as a business owner. How are you supposed to keep the staff that you need and the inventory that you need and things like that for when big things hit like this, if the rest of the time it's dead?
Yeah, exactly. And it's come at the time where we had Mission Impossible come out 2 weeks before these 2 massive films. So even that doesn't feel like it's had a proper theatrical run. I feel like if that had been released 6 months ago, it would have been in cinemas for 7-8 weeks. And instead now it's already gone down to 1 or 2 showings a day in its 4th or 5th week, I think. Which, it's not a bad thing. It's good to open up and have a look at the cinema show times and be like, wow, there's 6 films on here that I want to see. Which is, hasn't happened for I don't know how long. But obviously, with the cinemas doing well, the other thing that is pivotal at this point is the SAG actors strike that's going on. That is very important for the future of acting and kind of cinema as we know it. So for anybody that doesn't really know, we can jump into it a little bit. I'm sure everyone's kind of read a little bit and knows a little bit about what's going on. But with the changing face of, especially with AI, that's happening in the movie industry, there's some strikes that are going on basically to say that it needs to be regulated, and that there needs to be things in place, not to get rid of it altogether, just to make sure that actors aren't losing out on jobs. Because it's cheaper to have a robot do a first draft or whatever.
Yeah.
Which is also feels like a very weird and like futuristic thing to be happening. It feels very strange that this is something that is like the forefront of everyone's attention right now.
Yeah.
Well, and the other big component of both strikes is the streaming component.
Mm-hmm.
Streaming as it relates to residuals, because with television, broadcast TV, if you are an actor in an episode of CSI, if that episode airs and nobody watches it, you still got a check.
Yeah.
And shows don't, obviously cable still exists, so shows do air, but if you have a show that's only available to stream on a service like Hulu or Netflix, those residuals of the show, that episode airing, or if you're in every episode of the show, you don't get any money from that. And they haven't worked that out.
Yeah.
So that's a big part of it. And I know that the guilds both have their answers of how to resolve that, and it seems like it's just going to be a question of whether or not the studios accept that resolution, which I think I don't think I took a close look at the SAG stipulations, but I know that I think it was the Writers Guild had something where it was like basically you cut writers in on your subscription money. If a show is a Netflix exclusive, then some percentage or percentage of a percentage of subscription money needs to go to everybody who is involved in that project. That equivalent to what they would get if the movie or the show aired on network TV.
Yeah, there was an interview on the Commode and Mayo podcast recently with the I think he's the vice president of SAG, maybe. I'll have to just look it up just to make sure. But he was saying that the trouble is now that when these demands are met, especially with the streaming services, that they can kind of retaliate by upping the price of these streaming services and kind of blaming what's happening right now on the actors and the writers, and being like, hey, to be able to pay everyone, you're going to have to pay us an extra $7 a month, hypothetically, to get this content. And it's just going to turn into like a very messy kind of mudslinging thing. When in reality, it should be like, people should be paid for the job that they do.
Right.
And if they're working on streaming services, they should be paid for the same as if it's working on TV. It's all... Yeah. To me, it all seems to be rolled into the same ball. I mean, there's stories of actors, for example, that have worked one day on a film for like $200, and their likeness has been captured, and then they've been digitally added in the background of other scenes for nothing, for no additional payment, because it's just like, there's no rules to govern this at the moment, so we can use it. I mean, in the Flash movie, it's not really a spoiler when they looked at went back in time and kind of saw the other iterations. The original Flash, the actor that was there, tweeted like, I didn't even know I was in this movie until I was sitting in the cinema and there I was. And it's just
and I
insane.
heard that their excuse for that was it wasn't actually him. It was a likeness of the actual comic book version of the character. But they'll come up with any excuse. That just reminds me though of I think it was Gwyneth Paltrow who was in one of the Marvel films where she was like, I didn't know I was in this one. It's like she filmed everything like in a week or something. It's on the Chef Show. It's on the Chef Show, Jon Favreau's show. It's like the first episode where they're like making soup together. And he's like, when we did Spider-Man or whatever, she's like, Spider-Man? I wasn't in Spider-Man. He's
Hey,
like, what are you
she's
talking?
she's gonna be renting out her like bungalow on Airbnb or something. If
Oh,
you want to
wow.
go, if you want to pay some exorbitant fee
Yeah.
to
Eat
be
some bone broth.
to be Gwyneth Paltrow's guest, you can maybe hash it out with her.
I'll just make her
Solve
watch
this.
Spider-Man.
Solve this.
Yeah.
This issue.
Look, I'm putting. Look, I'll let you put the Spider-Man disc in the Blu-ray. I'll
Mhm.
show you.
Well, yeah. I mean, the AI thing just it's strange and it's creepy.
Yeah. There was I saw a tweet from, or maybe it was just a quote from I think it was a Warner Brothers executive, but I may be wrong on that. But they had basically said in an interview that this strike had saved them millions because they weren't paying anyone. And it's just like, how tone deaf can you be to the situation?
Yeah,
like, if you stop
exactly.
making movies altogether, you're going to save trillion. You're going to save billions of dollars because
Well,
you won't be making any movie. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, such a
Yeah.
silly thing to say.
Yeah, I mean I was listening to Mark Bernardin and Kevin Smith talk about Barbie earlier today, and they were talking about how, I guess as far as the Writers Guild goes, they've announced that they're setting a meeting to set a meeting, so
Right.
it's just like,
Yeah.
but they said that they feel like Barbie has something to do with that because they're realizing, oh well, we do need our actors to start promoting the films that are going to be coming out soon.
Yeah.
Because the actors for
Yeah.
Barbie were promoting the movie like months and months and months in advance. And if their actors are striking, then
well, the not that it's like a much anticipated movie in my book, but the Gran Turismo movie's been pushed back by 2 weeks because they said that exact same thing, that they haven't got any of the actors to promote it. So they, at this point, it's just like it's dependent on.
Potentially
publicity.
that's why, I mean, the Flash movie came out before the actor strike, but they didn't have any of the actors to promote it because of all the controversy around Ezra Miller, and it's like, it's kind of crazy. Like, I mean, I guess there's no real way to measure like whether or not that's the reason for the movie not doing well, but like,
I mean, the success to Barbie has got to have something to do with the amount of publicity.
Yeah, for sure.
For that many people to kind of keep going. It's been an all-out assault, which is great. I mean, because it's got people in the cinema. I mean, the knock-on effect to this, which, I fully support the strike and everything, I think is great, is just that we seem to be at a point in cinemas where it's like, okay, this is, record-breaking numbers, but we're not going to have content or films to put out, as regularly, because it's just putting a stop to everything that's in production. Everything that's going on right now, it's kind of put a halt to it. So we're going to reach a point again, like we did post-COVID, after the first kind of lockdown where everything stopped, that the films that we get are just going to dry up. And I think the studio should be thinking ahead about that as well.
Yeah.
Because like you said, there's streaming, there's cinemas, there's TV, there's, social media stuff that they've got to promote and put out. And it's like, it's an endless chasm of content that they need to fill. And they can't fill it without writers and actors.
Yeah.
So I hope they do something quick and give them what they want so that, everyone can be paid for the job that they do.
Yeah. Well, they're going on like 100 days for the writer's strike. It's about to be 100 days.
Yeah.
Or it will have been already 100 days by the time this airs.
Yeah.
I do not have faith in
No.
the studios taking the right lessons from the success of Barbie and Oppenheimer. I think I've already seen the CEO of Mattel kind of like announce like all of these projects that they want to do, and I'm like, I don't. That isn't what made Barbie a hit. what you appear to think.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, and two, it's like, okay, yeah, like it's good news that like the big movies of the summer are not franchise movies.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm like, but they're gonna do Barbie too.
Yeah.
Like.
But is Greta Gerwig going to do Barbie too?
Probably not. Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean,
no,
probably
I
not. But like,
I think she's already signed up to do something for Netflix. So
yeah. But like, you know, yeah, I don't. Yeah. And you know, it might not even have the same actors in it. So
right. I mean, I think the success of those two films really kind of comes down to the fact that they are different from most of the slop that Hollywood has been putting out.
Yeah.
It's something new, and they don't. I think audiences have gotten kind of tuned in to, okay, if I want to see this movie, I got to see it now because it's going to be a while before it's on streaming.
Yeah.
Disney seems to have had the opposite effect, where they've kind of trained their audiences to go, it's going to be on Disney Plus in 4 months.
Yeah.
So I'll wait, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that people don't know when they're going to be able to see Barbie and Oppenheimer, and they both have a event movie kind of feel to them. Barbie is like, oh, you know, dress in pink, and some theaters have the big Barbie box that you can stand in and take a picture in. And Oppenheimer has this format kind of event aspect to it, where you got to see it in IMAX or it's on film, you know, and that makes people excited to go and see it because it's not Ant-Man 4 or even The Flash. I mean, you know, it's
also the crazy thing that I realized recently about Oppenheimer. I mean, it's a Christopher Nolan film, right?
Right.
And he's like, he's known now as one of the greatest directors, right?
Yeah.
Especially like living directors. And there's kids right now, like 19-year-olds, that are going to see the movie, and it's their first Nolan film to see in a theater.
Yeah.
You know, and they've been hearing about Nolan, or they've seen Nolan films.
Yeah.
You know, they've seen Interstellar and Inception and The Dark Knight at home, but they've never, you know, and they know that like Nolan is like considered this cinema god, who's someone who's you have to see in a cinema, and they're now at an age where they can go see a Nolan film because Tenet came out during COVID.
Right.
And what was before that?
Dunkirk.
Yeah, which they would have been, I mean, that was like 2017 or 2016.
Right. That was,
they would have been,
2017.
You know, they were like still young.
Right.
Young, you know.
Right.
So, yeah, it's kind of crazy. It's kind of crazy because...
That's interesting. I hadn't considered that or thought of that.
Yeah, it's only because I'm working with a lot of teenagers right now. So.
Gotcha. I mean, I also think that kind of comes into why last year the two really successful movies. You know, we kind of talk about like fatigue over like more superhero movies or more sequels because we've seen like Mission Impossible 7 or 8, whichever number it is. The response to it has been kind of lukewarm. The most recent Fast and the Furious movie, same. Whereas the previous two films in those series were very popular. The two big movies last year were both sequels, Top Gun Maverick and Avatar: The Way of Water. But they were sequels to movies that came out years, but you know, they still felt like oh, yeah, I remember Top Gun, you know, or you know, I remember seeing Avatar. So there was still a novelty to them. The fact that you hadn't been bombarded with Top Gun and Avatar for years, or multiple times a year, the way all these other series do, where it's easy to get sick of them.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it also helped. I think it's not only that, but it's that like the movies that hit also deliver.
Yeah.
You know, they're good movies.
I also want to point out, not that it was a breaking box up. Well, I should say, it wasn't breaking like global or even domestic box office records, but Asteroid City, I think
Yeah.
it's the highest grossing movie of Wes Anderson's career,
Yeah.
if I remember correctly.
And even
So,
that was put onto streaming within
pretty,
3 weeks.
yeah, it was like 3 or 4 weeks. It was
Yeah.
pretty quickly, and it was still getting butts in seats.
Yeah.
So, and that was another thing too. Is I think it was pointed out recently. Someone said Elemental, which I think is still hasn't made enough money,
No.
but it has a surprising amount of legs. I actually went and saw Elemental a week or two ago on a weekday, and the theater was half full.
That's great.
And this movie had been out for a month, so now a movie like that, it's not helpful if a movie that costs 250 million or however much it costs to make, it's not helpful if a movie like that has those kind of legs. It is good when a Wes Anderson movie has legs, because it's like, okay, it made back its budget and then some, and shows that audiences are also, again, interested in something different that delivers.
Yeah, it's going to be great to see that, the top movies of the year in terms of box office are going to be made by these very singular filmmakers, as opposed to, studio films, which I hope is the case. We're going to have Barbie and Oppenheimer up towards the top. Mission Impossible, like I said, it's done good business. It's not, like a failure by any stretch of the imagination, Hopefully Wes Anderson will be up there as well, because, it's just great to have these, I don't know, these really interesting people making these movies and have them do really well.
Yes.
Instead of just, getting them on streaming and kind of, because I feel like Noah Baumbach's now is kind of stuck with like this Netflix contract that he's got. It worked really well at the beginning of COVID when Marriage Story came out and then got all the Oscar nominations, and kind of like, because that was how we were watching films at that point. Right. And then we got White Noise that is literally just like white noise. It just kind of faded into the background. And nobody talked about it. And
it was in theaters for a week. And I almost
didn't even know it was in theaters. Yeah.
Netflix was doing this where they did this with what was the Knives Out sequel? They did it where they released it for like a week, but like 2 months before it came to Netflix. So I remember hearing all this buzz about it months before it was on Netflix. And by the time it came out on Netflix, nobody was talking about it anymore. The buzz had died down because it was only in theaters for a week. And it was like the perfect opportunity for Netflix to keep a film in theaters for a decent run. To lead up to the eventual streaming premiere.
I'm very interested to see how Apple TV are going to handle Killers of the Flower Moon.
It's getting an IMAX release.
Mm-hmm.
So
hopefully we get a sustained cinema run before it's on streaming, because it could be another
I mean, all the trailers are in cinemas right now. So
I am getting the feeling that they are gearing for a sort of standard theatrical run, which for a 3.5 hour long, movie might still be kind of short, but I don't think it's going to be in and out in a week. It's you're going to have opportunities to see it. So
I think what would be interesting for Apple TV to kind of have the cake and eat it too would be to have this like theatrical run where it's a lot of promotion, but then around the same time drop like a very like in-depth kind of making of documentary on Apple TV Plus, so that when you've seen it you can go and watch the documentary and get that and kind of balance it together. Because especially with Scorsese, he's so like I want to know how he works. Everybody knows DiCaprio's in it, De Niro's in it. It's this based on a book. There's so many things that you can go into that would be really interesting to have as like it could, half an hour, 45-minute documentary but it would get me to get Apple TV.
Yeah.
They also just don't have a lot of stuff, right?
No,
They're kind
they
of
don't.
like
It's very limited. Yeah.
Right. So it seems like giving their stuff, if they give movies more meatier theatrical runs, seems like, I don't know, that would make them stand out among the competition.
Yeah. Definitely.
There's a like a PBS documentary from 1979 or 1980 called "The Day After Trinity" about Oppenheimer and the test explosion that has been streaming on Criterion Channel for, I don't know, months now, and it's now like it's popped up on their most popular films because people are like, oh, I like, because people who are in there's like old men talking in this old documentary who are characters in the movie.
Yeah.
you know, so you see the movie and then you're like, oh, that's what that guy really looks like and sounds like, and hearing them tell the stories is very interesting. So having that supplemental stuff, people go to it, you know, people jump to go watch that stuff for sure. So
yeah. And obviously there's people that watch that collect, you know, the boutique Blu-ray with that is just for the special features most of the time. You know, we've seen the film, we want the making of and the commentaries and stuff like that. I feel like that's where streaming can deliver, you know. And that's what Criterion Channel are really good at, because they do, they present those as well. And it's, you know, come away from the content to fill the chasm and more towards, you know, just showing them in the correct way, giving you a little bit more than just the film, I think should be potentially the way forward. And it's a cheaper way of making content, right? You just hire a documentary crew to make like a making of on the set. And it's like, cool, that's cheaper than getting sets and actors and, you know, all that kind of stuff to make a 6-part TV series that no one's going to watch.
The bigger studios don't like doing that though, because they don't want the dirty little secrets or the squabbles, and the fights. They don't want you to know what creative differences actually means.
But speaking of Apple and physical media, though, like, I feel like Apple should and could make amazing physical media for some of these movies, because, like, we've all opened some kind of brand new Apple packaging. It's always super sexy. Like, imagine what that Apple 4K Blu-ray would look like. You know?
Well, they have one movie in the Criterion Collection, so that's always a sign. It's a documentary about the Velvet Underground, directed by Todd Haynes. But it's like, oh, well, okay, so it makes you go, oh, so Apple maybe is developing a relationship with Criterion to get their films released. But also, Todd Haynes, the director, has a film or two already in the Criterion Collection, so maybe it was just his relationship with them that got them that. I don't know. Scorsese has a lot of movies in the Criterion Collection, so
he does. I'm sure there'll be clamoring for this one. But I mean, the other thing is, like, I know that I myself was part of this when they started announcing, especially the partnership with like Netflix and that Apple TV one was a bit like, why are we doing it on like a kind of a 4K release? You know, like a really top of the state, you know, top of the art disc with loads of extras and stuff. And then I think it was a week ago that Netflix are going to take off the Power of the Dog, I think, from its streaming service. So
I actually saw that, and I dug a little deeper into that because.
And it's not true.
Well, no, it's in your region.
Yeah.
It will be leaving because it's going to like BBC Player or something like that.
Okay, iPlayer.
Because because the BBC co-produced it. So part of the deal was that it would have a couple years on Netflix and then go to BBC iPlayer. And I don't know how long, but it's
Yeah.
not because it's not coming off in the States. Netflix is its home in the States.
Yeah.
So, but that does go into, Disney and I think Paramount. I don't know. All of these services have removed things that are exclusive to their service. Now I know there was I think Paramount took one of their newer. They've been putting out a lot of different Star Trek series, and one of them I guess wasn't really getting the views, so they took it down. But that does have a physical media release. The Disney stuff I don't think does at all. The Disney Plus stuff, that stuff that's gone.
Yeah.
Willow the series is gone.
Yeah.
For, it's in the cloud.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah. There's too much content for the streaming services to even keep on the platform now.
Right.
Yeah.
The crazy thing is something like that could potentially have an audience that would find it years later.
Well, isn't that the point of these places? So that people can discover what they want? It's just the corporation telling us what to watch.
Yeah.
And it's gross. So
yeah.
In short, no to big studio bosses making 400% more than the lowest paid employee, and yes to actors' demands and physical media.
Well, not that he's a studio head, but the movie that we're discussing today does have a Hollywood producer as a character. And we do get to sort of see, a kind of ineptness. He's not inept. He's aloof. He is a fish out of water in this particular setting. But we get to sort of get some background on his method through his phone calls that he makes, about how a movie might be made or what kind of thoughts and processes go into it. On the subject of remakes too, this is something. I think one of the reasons I also chose this movie is when I saw this, I had no knowledge. When I first saw it, I didn't know who Ivor Novello was. Mm-hmm. Never heard of him. So I was really fascinated by there's a real, one of the characters in this movie is a real guy. Mm. And I only learned this last night from listening to the commentary track with the screenwriter, Julian Fellows, is that when they are discussing the lodger in this film, they are not talking about the silent film directed by Hitchcock. Ivor Novello produced and wrote a remake of The Lodger for the sound when sound came in, and that film flopped. The Hitchcock version was a hit, and a few years later, film is set in November 1932, and in the summer of 1932, his remake of The Lodger, the sound remake, came out, and it was a huge flop. So that was weighing on him. And I always thought, watching the movie, I was like, that's interesting that The Lodger, I was thinking the silent film was a flop, but it was actually a hit, and they're talking about another one.
Yeah, because I was going to bring this up because I watched it with my family, and obviously being a huge Hitchcock fan, I was saying, it's the guy from The Lodger. I love The Lodger. It's Hitchcock's kind of first Hitchcockian picture. It's the first film where you can see him like the director who's going to be. And when Maggie Smith is like, it's a shame about The Lodger, and it not doing very well. My dad was like, did it not do very well? I was like, I'm pretty sure that it was well regarded across the world. Everybody kind of saw it and was like, the British cinema is kind of progressing due to this one film. So I was going to that was in my notes. I was going to bring that up because I was like, that doesn't track at all.
Well, so should we use this as a segue into the...
I think it's a perfect segue.
Yes. It's time now, as you might have guessed, to talk about our feature presentation.
Gosford Park, 2001. Tea at 4, dinner at 8, murder at midnight. In 1930s England, a group of pretentious rich and famous gather together for a weekend of relaxation in a hunting resort. At a hunting resort, it's just their house. Yeah. So they have a weekend hunting, but when a murder occurs, each one of these interesting characters becomes a suspect.
Dun dun dun.
So Zach, you've talked about the fact that you picked this and the reasons why. So we know that you've seen it before. Brandon, was this ever on your radar? Have you seen this before? Did you kind of know about this film?
No. The end of the show. No. And I don't know that much about Altman. I haven't seen many of his films. I've seen The Player. Yeah. And that might be it, honestly.
That's the same for me.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard people talk about him, but he The Player was good. Like, I watched it in film school and we analyzed it, and I was like, yeah, it's interesting, but it wasn't like, to me it wasn't like entertainment, it wasn't like oh, I got to see this guy's movies. So yeah, not on my radar at all, and it wasn't a glass of hot milk for me. It was kind of lukewarm.
Okay.
But I can see the greatness in it, obviously, like, the attention to detail, the setting, the actors, the cinematography, the realism, all of it is really great. But it is a lot. Like, the movie is a lot. And, I watched it twice, and the first time didn't even really count because I was like, I watched it when we first were going to record this, like a month ago. I watched it because I thought we were going to maybe record the next day. And I had just gotten off work, and I was just super tired. And that's not a state to be in to watch this movie because you have to be, like, very attentive. And so it's like, even if you are attentive, I think it's still a lot. There's a lot happening, and you don't quite know who you're supposed to follow and what you're supposed to pay attention to, which is, I don't think it's necessarily. I guess what I'm trying to say is this movie's not for everybody, if because it's very, you can enjoy this movie if you just I think you just have to. It's not like any other movie. Like, you're not being spoon-fed anything, like, and you don't. I think I'm trained, and a lot of people might be trained to, especially like in American cinema, to I don't know, for like the camera work, I guess, to kind of tell more of the story for you, or like zoom in on something that's important, or like, you know what I mean? Like, they're just to be more like little things that kind of subconsciously kind of help tell the story. But there's so many characters and so much information that the first time I watched it, I was just kind of, I don't know, I wasn't like totally sucked in. The second time I appreciated it a lot more, but I still was like, man, there is so much going on in this movie that I know, like, if I keep watching it, I'm going to have a different experience every time.
Yeah. There's so much to this film.
Yeah. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think we need more movies like that. We need more movies that kind of keep on giving and don't. I mean, like we were talking about all the sequels and, big budget studio movies that have come out the last few years. Some of them I'll watch once and be like, that was pretty good, but I have no interest in rewatching. This is a movie that I know if I rewatch it, I will have a different experience every time. But I also am not sure that I want to anyway, honestly, because the characters are and the world is so like, you know, annoying. I mean, it's like it's very it's you know it's a big class structure difference.
Yeah.
You know, in the way that society was, and you know, it's just a lot of like despicable characters. So it's like,
Yeah.
and they're so real that it's just like, do I really want to like sit around and listen to these people talk for another 2 hours?
Yeah.
But yeah, there is still a lot there to enjoy, and I'm sure I will watch it again. But yeah, that's just kind of where I'm at with it right now, at the moment. How about you, Lewis? What was your kind of reaction to it, and what's your relationship with Altman?
Yeah, I mean, Altman himself, like you said, Brandon. I think I've only seen The Player, and that was only towards the end of last year. So there's not been a huge amount of Altman that I've watched. I have Nashville on Blu-ray, but I haven't found the time to watch it yet, unfortunately. With Gosford Park itself, though, this was a phenomenon when it came out in England. It was everywhere. Like, everybody was talking about it. I can remember we watched it when it came out on either VHS or DVD. I can't. It was around the time of like the switch over. We rented it, and I can remember, watching it because Stephen Fry narrates the Harry Potter books for English audiobooks. So I had grown up listening to Stephen Fry and just like, loving him basically. So it was great to, I wanted to watch it because of him. Julian Fellows, the writer, was the first screenwriter that I think I was aware of, like, them being a separate entity. He seemed to be wheeled out a lot on like British talk shows and stuff. Yeah. As like the big selling point of this film. It was,
and in America too. I mean,
yeah.
He was always kind of presented separate from Altman, or they would do stuff together.
And I think that's because of what you were saying, Brandon, because so much of it is in the script. It's not what we see, it's what others say. The whole crux of the film about who murdered Michael Gambon's character is basically told to us through dialogue, not directly, but like indirectly. It's all kind of the twisty turny, and it's also the tropes of the Agatha Christie murder mysteries just being absolutely destroyed. The inspector coming halfway through the film would normally call for a very well put together investigation that includes like everybody being interviewed, but this is not that. This is just, it's playing with those ideas that we already have to wrong foot us all the time. You're looking for things that aren't there because it's at the end it's a pretty simple, like, why did they do it? But we're presented with all these different elements that our mind kind of is trying to piece them together to make sense and like keep reaching. I couldn't remember who did it. I was pretty sure that it was Maggie Smith due to money problems most of the way through. I was like, that would be a good way to do it, but it wasn't. So, yeah, I mean, I think that it was just such a big part of British culture around this time. It's crazy.
That's interesting. It won the BAFTA for Best British Film.
Yeah, it was huge. Because I watched it again with my parents, and I said, "Do you remember when it came out? How big it was?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, it was like everywhere."
Yeah.
So.
Well, yeah. So this might be a good time for me to give you guys a little bit of like I'll try and be as short as I can with it, like a primer on Altman.
Yeah.
And I say I'll try to be as short with it, and it's because he has a very long career.
Yeah.
He basically started working in movies in some capacity, like right after he got out of the service after World War II. He moved to LA, sold a couple of stories to RKO, was frustrated with the way that they wouldn't let him. They weren't interested. This is like beginner's luck, by the way. He didn't have connections in LA. He's from Kansas City, Missouri, and he loves Kansas City. Like leaving home to go to war was like the first time that he left Kansas City and kind of saw the wider world. So he was like frustrated with he wasn't allowed to write the script. They wouldn't let him on set. So he was like, I'm going to go to New York and try and make it as a writer. Well, that success he had in LA with selling a couple of stories was beginner's luck, like I say. He didn't have any success in New York, so he moved back to Kansas City. And he started working for an industrial film company, editing and then directing industrial films for years. A local businessman was like, I want to make a film about teen delinquents. So this was Altman's shot at making a feature narrative film. So his feature debut is called The Delinquents from 1957. I've never seen it, but I think you can watch it on YouTube. But it's successful, so he gets work in television and directing TV shows. And this is like where his attitude starts developing, where he kind of likes doing things differently. He likes filming things differently from what the standard is. He's like more interested in background actors than he is in with his lead actors, things like that. This stuff always causes him to be butting heads with the people who hired him, but he works quickly and he gets stuff done. So he would like lose jobs a lot. He'd get fired or he'd quit. But there was always another offer coming around because someone knew, well, we can depend on that guy. In the late 60s, he made a couple of features that I have not seen, Countdown and That Cold Day in the Park. They weren't really noteworthy films, but I'm eventually going to see them out of curiosity. But 1970 is like the year that Altman becomes Altman. That's the year of MASH. MASH is a 20th Century Fox film. It's an adaptation of a novel. It is a very mean-spirited satire about war, and it's a huge hit. Gets Altman an Oscar nomination for Best Director, and it really is the start of his career. The 70s is like the key decade for Altman. From 1970 to 1979, Altman directed 13 feature films. And he was always like a hit with critics. Critics really liked his movies. Pauline Kael, especially, who was kind of like one of the biggest film critics of that era, was a real big champion of his work. But as the decade goes on, the movies make less and less money. He always kind of depended on like the idea of having a hit every few years. Like Nashville came out in 75, and that was a successful film. Got him another couple more Oscar nominations and kind of sustained him for a bit to keep making these smaller movies that didn't really make any money. But, and I should say he discovered, well, he didn't probably, but Shelley Duvall her first film was a film of his, Brewster McCloud, which is my parents' favorite film. And she made 7 films, I think, in total with Altman. In the 70s, the only director she worked with was Altman. She did 1 Woody Allen movie and 1 Stanley Kubrick movie, The Shining. And then the rest of it's all Altman. In 1980, he makes Popeye, which is, I don't know if it was like a flop, but it didn't make the kind of money that the studio wanted it to make, and critics really tore it apart. It, however, has been reevaluated. Like now, critics going back and looking at it like it. And if you go back and look, Siskel and Ebert both liked it when it came out, so they gave it good reviews. It's had its comeback, but Popeye was kind of like the death of his Hollywood career. And so the 80s is Altman is working completely independently. Most of his movies in the 80s are adaptations of plays. They're very small scale compared to the stuff he did in the 70s. And, independently produced, independently distributed. And again, those movies are pretty well received. They don't make a lot of money, but I think he was like teaching film at a university at the time and supplementing his income with that. So The Player is a big movie because that is like his Hollywood comeback. And then he has back-to-back hits because The Player, and then the year after that he has Shortcuts, which is kind of a quintessential Altman film. So what's a quintessential Altman film is basically a large cast. There's no main character. There's intersecting storylines. Characters are talking over each other. There's dialogue is overlapping. And the way he uses the camera, like you mentioned, Brandon, is being quite different from what you usually see in American cinema. His camera's kind of like a passive observer. Kind of taking a step back. So like a typical Altman film has these wide shots where it's the room and every, there's like 10 people lined up throughout the room in the shot, and they're all talking at the same time. And you're catching bits and pieces of dialogue, So The Player was kind of like a quote unquote comeback for him. And then throughout the 90s, he continued making films in this kind of same style. And then Gosford Park is almost like a third comeback or a second comeback, another comeback. Yeah. Gosford Park comes out in 2001. And I think it's the second highest grossing film of his career. Another Oscar nomination. The film obviously won screenplay. And then he makes only two more films after that. The Company, which is like a film about a dance group. And then A Prairie Home Companion. 2006 is kind of a big year for Altman because, one, he wins an honorary Academy Award. So he'd never won a competitive Oscar. A little bit later that year, his final film, Prairie Home Companion, is released. And then a few months after that, I think in November 2006, he passes away at the age of, 81, I think. Yeah, he was 81. But like thematically, Altman is a guy who's interested in, I think, he's associated with counterculture. So he's interested in like questioning authority, questioning kind of the status quo, turning it on its head, making fun of it. Obviously, this movie deals very heavily with class structure, the upstairs and the downstairs. That's what, if you listen to any interviews with him and Julian Fellows, the writer, those are the terms, the specific terms that they use, the upstairs people and the downstairs people. This film came out of Bob Balaban, who plays Weissman, the producer, calling him up and saying, I would like to work with you. Can we work on something together? Because Balaban is a producer on this film as well. And so Altman, as you pointed out, Lewis, he kind of takes all these Agatha Christie tropes and turns them on their head. He was like, I've never done a whodunit. I would like to do a whodunit. A lot of Altman movies are genre movies, but like, I don't want to say making fun of the genre, but presenting it in a way that you don't expect. MASH is a war movie about doctors. They are the doctors who operate on soldiers. There are no battle scenes in MASH. The only blood and gore you ever see in the movie are scenes on the operating table. And the movie ends with a football match. It's about people who are in the army who hate being in the army. They're forced to be in it. They have to be here. The Long Goodbye is a film noir, literally based on a Marlowe book, a character that Humphrey Bogart played. Now he's played by Elliot Gould. And it's, again, kind of like taking noir elements and turning them on his head. on their head. He made a couple of Westerns in the 70s that were Buffalo Bill and the Indians is a Western that he made that is actually about the way that Buffalo Bill and the Indians is about how we present the West and mythologize it in our entertainment, and have been doing that for years or decades, you know. So he's interested in taking like a genre and cutting it open and pulling stuff out and rearranging things. In later interviews, he would describe Gosford Park as not really being a whodunit. It's more of a who the hell cares whodunit. And I actually think that if you watch it again, if you ever sit down and watch it again, Brendan, I think going in with the approach that this film is full of details that you don't necessarily need to remember. It's kind of like going along for the ride. Like, I still don't remember half the characters' names, and I've watched it twice in the last month, and I'm still kind of like fuzzy on like the exact details of the marriages between there's the three sisters, and one's married to Michael Gamba and one's the other thing, and I still kind of like don't remember all of those details. And I don't necessarily think that they're important to Altman. So my enjoyment of the movie comes mostly from kind of being that passive observer. With this film in particular, one neat thing that I didn't realize, I learned a lot from Julian Fellows' commentary, is that the downstairs people, the servants, there is a servant in every single scene of the film. There's never a moment where there's not a servant. If there isn't, they're on the other side of the door and they're about to knock.
Yeah.
So the upstairs people are never alone. They're always essentially being watched. There's eyes and ears everywhere. And they did talk about how the camera in particular in this, Altman almost wanted you to have to crane your neck to kind of peek, like the camera's like peeking around the corner, in a lot of scenes. And we actually enter the house through the downstairs entrance. We don't go inside the house until Kelly MacDonald goes into the house. We follow her in. So it is kind of, it's interesting that it is kind of positioned as being from the perspective of the downstairs people. The film kind of aligns you with them, even though you're talking about this movie's full of crappy people. Even the servants, there's crappy, some of those servants are assholes.
Yeah.
And we're kind of spying on this world that I don't think exists anymore. I don't know to what extent landed gentry still exist in England. I know Julian Fellows comes from that world.
I mean his big, Gosford Park was his big thing until he did Downton Abbey,
right?
Which is Gosford Park without the murder. So
it's also, and because Maggie Smith's character, I think they just changed the first Grantham to Trantham or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So Gosford, Downton Abbey is like a spiritual successor to Gosford Park, but I think that Downton Abbey, and I only watched the first season. I never kept watching it, or first series, I guess you'd say. And I think that it's not just without the murder. It's I think the big difference between them, one of the big differences, is that I think Julian Fellows would, in his commentary track, he would kind of acknowledge a lot of the inequality and the problematic elements of the upper class people and that sort of thing, and these issues that they had and what was wrong with this society. But I also think he's nostalgic for it. Because if he had been born 20 years earlier, he would be in this movie. He would be in that world
Yeah.
And would have, maybe he did have butlers and maids. I don't know when he was growing up, but certainly his older relatives did. And he talks about how some of the characters are inspired by like my great aunt. And this was actually something that she said, the Maggie Smith character. He drew a lot from older relatives on things that she would say. And Altman is not nostalgic for this. I mean, not that he ever lived through it, but I think that his attitude towards this world would be things aren't that way anymore and good riddance.
Yeah.
And Downton Abbey, I don't think has that good riddance attitude to it. It is pure nostalgia. Wouldn't it have been wonderful to have kind of lived this in this world as the landed gentry? And the servants don't really have it that bad.
Yeah. Yeah, it's there's definitely, the hint of kind of enjoying the gossip. There's a lot of things that happen in this film that you can imagine if the upstairs people had found out, they would really enjoy talking about it to other people. And, like who is having an affair with one of the maids, who is, creeping up backstairs, which butler is having a cigarette on the back stairs when someone's coming out, all this kind of stuff. There's a definite glee to kind of showing us these kind of dirty little secrets that are hidden throughout the house. Right. Because obviously when we get to the big reveal and we find out, the big secret that's kind of tying all this together, it's incredibly shocking compared to the stuff that we've seen already. The other stuff is just kind of like, just people being alone in a house together. Where that is like proper class differences and what people will do just to be able to live and like earn money. Which is really interesting. I think the one thing, and I want to thank my mum because she kind of pointed this out while we're watching it. She was like, how would you go about directing these scenes with all these people in it? Because there's so many people hitting a mark, coming in to shot, coming out, going upstairs, coming down, having conversations, talking to somebody else. And I think that's kind of the lens that I watched it through from then, is kind of just how difficult this would have been to pull off. Because all these characters, like you said, Zach, are constantly talking. The camera is constantly focusing on other people, but there's still people in the background that you're kind of watching. It's incredible, really, kind of how this is all put together. And if you do go back and watch it, I would say that would be a good starting point. In terms of, for me, that's kind of when it really started to click, is when I watched just the technique behind the direction.
And I know this is something that Altman has done a lot before. I know he did it with The Player, and I'm sure there were instances where he didn't necessarily follow this, but something that he did do with this movie is basically if the cameras were rolling, everyone had to be in character. And so, because you didn't know if you were going to be in a shot, and everyone was mic'd up. So everything you say is going to be caught on mic. So I think part of it is kind of establishing that element where, okay, once action is called, you're in character, but you are just working. Or if you're a footman, you're just working. Or for this scene. And if you are one of the upstairs, you are lounging. And Fellows talks about how he's like, these parties were actually really like awkward, and they kind of show that through the Weissman character, because like after dinner, there wasn't like okay, we're going to play charades now. There was no like center of attention. It was literally just, you were in the lounge and you could just pick up a book and read. But you had to be in there to like Weissman is like trying to strike up conversations and people don't want to talk to him, and there was no order to them. So you would just I assume that the actors are just, okay, well, what would my character be doing?
Yeah.
Getting a bridge game going. Ivor Novello would be playing at the piano,
Yeah.
So I think that is something that Altman as a director does, is I think he puts a lot of faith in the actors knowing their characters and what their characters would do.
Yeah.
Because he also allows for improvisation. He actually has said something to the effect of, the screenplay is just a blueprint. I don't have to follow the screenplay. If the actors discover something, or if we discover something while we're filming, that is what we're going to do, even if it's not in the script.
Yeah, I did find it really interesting in the behind-the-scenes footage that Altman was talking about how, when he got to the set, he would not read the screenplay.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, the actors know their lines. He's like, we're just going to shoot the scene. And then he would, after the scene was done, he would turn to the script supervisor and be like, did we get everything that, like, plot point wise it was in there?
Yeah.
And she would be like, well, somebody was supposed to talk about this part about the murder, and he would be like, oh, okay. But he still wouldn't look at it and be like, who was supposed to talk about the murder? Okay, all right. We're going to do it again. Make sure you talk about this.
Yeah.
And, it's a very interesting way of working that is very, I think can only come with having a track record of, being Robert Altman at almost, however old he was. I mean, this is very late in his career. This is 2001, and he died in 2006, right? So he was,
right. He's in his mid 70s.
Yeah. So because I think, at least for me as like a, new indie filmmaker, I would be like, there's no way. I would have to have every shot, storyboarded, and it would be so anxiety inducing to have all of these people and just be like, let's just do it.
Yeah.
Well,
and if you get it right, I'll know. I'll see what I like after we get this take done.
Yeah.
The two lead actors of MASH, Elliot Gould and Donald Sutherland, tried to get Altman fired.
On this movie?
From MASH.
Oh, from MASH.
Yes. Because he was directing that way.
Well, that's crazy to me.
Back then. And
I mean, he was born in 1925, so how old was he?
He was in his 40s, early 40s, I think, when MASH was made. But he was not a name.
Yeah.
He was, but he has also, on that film, he's talked about how 20th Century Fox had two other really big epic war movies going on, Patton and Tora Tora Tora. And so he said one of the reasons that he was able to get away with directing the way that he directs on this studio movie is that they weren't really paying attention to him. They weren't too worried. Yeah. Their energy was focused on their two big epics, not MASH. So MASH was a surprise to everybody. I think the actors were probably surprised that the movie turned out good. The studio was surprised that it made money and people liked it. So that clout, he was able to use that clout throughout the 70s to continue making films that way. And that was that was the era of the auteur, New Hollywood. And when the New Hollywood bubble burst, his Hollywood career came to an end for 10 years, He started to start working independently. But he always was kind of independent. It was kind of like he would get money from the studio and then kind of would go off and do his thing.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a very New Hollywood way to direct because I know with Hitchcock, ding, 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 Lewis is going to talk about Hitchcock again, that he would storyboard everything out, and by the time it came to actually filming it, he would be like, that would be the boring part because he'd already filmed it in his head. He knew exactly what he wanted, what shot, stories of him falling asleep on set while actors are doing takes because he was just like, I'm just this is like the legwork kind of thing. It's so different to this type of directing where Altman, as you said, Brandon, would just come onto set and kind of go off vibes. Want, have a loose skeleton that he wants, the marks that needs to hit, but everything else would come together, which I think is really, really fun way to direct, because you get get these characters to be able to bloom a little bit, and the actors can flex their muscles and kind of, Richard E. Grant perhaps wouldn't have been as memorable if he had just been scripted. Half of this comes with like the looks and the the cigarettes being lit on the candlesticks when he's snuffing them out and things like that, which potentially wouldn't have been scripted, but they're just kind of letting him run free.
Yeah. Well, you also have to make sure that, you have to have a good script, and you have to cast right, and you have to hire the right crew.
Yeah.
If you're going to direct like that,
for me, everyone that came onto the screen, I was like, I know this person. I know this person.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was just because it was like, I wanted to check with you all. Was that the same case for you?
For the most part, yeah.
Yeah.
Even the guy, we had just finished Ted Lasso. The guy from Ted Lasso is in it.
Yeah.
He's
Who?
It's
Higgins.
Okay.
Which guy is Higgins? I don't remember.
Higgins is
some of the characters. I do not remember the names.
Yeah, Higgins is his name in Ted Lasso. I forget the actor's name, but he's one of the downstairs, one of the butlers.
Just look at the cast of Ted Lasso, Zach, and you'll
Jeremy
recognize
Swift. Okay, so what's funny is the first time I saw this, when I was 14 or however old I was, the weird part was I don't think I was very good at recognizing actors at that time, because there were actors in this movie that I had seen or that I saw later that I didn't realize were in this, even though I'd seen it. Like Kelly MacDonald, I don't think I became aware of Kelly MacDonald like as an actor until No Country for Old Men. Her performance in that, that was where I was like, oh wow, I didn't know she was Scottish. Not realizing that I had seen this and I had seen Trainspotting.
Yeah.
Which she's a prominent figure, and so like I think I just like never registered her after seeing the movie. So when I watch it now, it's more of that, like, I know that now that I feel like I've seen more stuff where I'm like, okay, I recognize that guy and her. I have seen them in other things. So not so much the first time I saw it though.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, the same. It was just Stephen Fry.
Stephen Fry, I do remember. And Brendan, this comes into our blasphemy episode where I trash talked Jacques Tati, the French director. And Stephen Fry's character is like totally styled after Jacques Tati's character, Monsieur Rouleau. That's just one, he's tall enough, but like just the way he stands, the way he carries himself, the pipe and everything. So I thought that was funny, even though I don't.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for sure. It's definitely like I picked up more on the brilliance, I guess, of this film, the accomplishment of this film. I think the second time I watched it, because I realized that there's a very real like satirical thing going on with the film, but you're not necessarily. I don't know if you're necessarily in on the joke the whole time, because it's also very serious. Like it feels like a very serious drama at the same time, and it's an interesting balance that it weaves in and out of that way throughout the film. Because the ending also is very emotional with, Helen Mirren and her whole scene and stuff, and it feels real. It doesn't feel like it's been unearned, even though a lot of the film is satirical.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do like all the scenes with the inspector, and I really like the assistant as well. I liked him a lot the second time I watched it. Noticed all of his background stuff.
He was
Basically.
pointing out all the clues.
Yeah, exactly.
What's really kind of funny is that recently I've been subscribed to Audible, and I listen to audiobooks as I fall asleep, just to. Cause it's nice
This
and
is not a
soothing.
sponsorship.
It isn't. There's other audiobook streaming services available. But part of the Audible membership is the complete works of Sherlock Holmes read by Stephen Fry. And that's what I've been listening to recently.
Yeah.
So it's very weird to hear Stephen Fry read Sherlock Holmes as a very competent investigator, and then to watch this where he's literally just sitting on clues and touching everything before they've dusted for prints, and just being a general buffoon, which I is playing against who Stephen Fry is as a person. He's very intelligent.
Yes, and just leaning heavily into the point that the film is making about class, right? Because he doesn't care about the downstairs people. He just he cares about the important people. There's that one moment, and this is not with him, but I feel like it's the line that basically is like the whole point that the movie's trying to make is it's William Gambon's daughter and the guy who they've had an affair, and they sneak off, and this is kind of one of those moments where the camera is like hiding behind like the plants almost, like spying on them, and then I hear something, and Richard E. Grant walks in. And he says, "Oh, don't worry, he's nobody." She says, like, you really should make your presence known before you walk in. And he said, "Don't worry, he's nobody." And that's it. Like, that's the whole movie right there, right? Like, in terms of like the point of how the upstairs view the downstairs. And
I think like Stephen Fry's character is a perfect middle class. He comes in and he's above the downstairs, but he's also watching his airs and graces around when he's talking about his wife, and he's like, well, how women are, or wives. He's still kind of trying to fit into that. He's not comfortable there either. So it does, it shows kind of every type of person in England at this time.
Also, this is a really stupid joke, but it's one of my favorite jokes that people do is when people call someone by the wrong name. His name is Thompson.
Yeah.
And someone calls him Thomas.
Yeah.
Detective Thomas. That's anytime you do that in a movie, I'm probably going to laugh.
Yeah, exactly. Well, if you think about,
it's stupid, but
it is funny. I mean, if you think about like the detectives of the fiction that this is kind of based on, it's like their name sells the series, whereas with Thompson it's so bland. Yeah, and it isn't even, for a while I was like, we're not even going to know what it is, because every time he starts to say it, he's interrupted, or somebody comes in, which I found very funny, because Miss Marple or Poirot or Sherlock Holmes or whoever, it's their name that sells the story, whereas this is like actually is very inept.
Right. Again, turning the genre, on its head.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is a film that's going to definitely improve with future watchers when I'm not so wrapped up in who did it and why. Now that I don't have to guess and try and follow it, I can just kind of sink into it a little bit more. I think it's definitely gonna improve for me. Not saying that I didn't like it before we get to the ratings.
So like, what are some of your? Because this is a movie where I'm like, I don't know if I have a lot of favorite details or favorite moments that I wouldn't even describe as being like full scenes. What were some of your guys' favorite details? Just little things in the film.
I was gonna say earlier when we were talking about the level of detail and the actors, just letting the actors kind of improvise or live in the scene. Everybody is mic'd up and acting when the cameras are rolling. There's like a scene where it's before they really discuss the reason that they're counting knives, where one of the downstairs people is counting the knives,
Mm-hmm.
and then gets interrupted
Mm-hmm.
for a second, and then like frustratingly goes back to like has to start recounting the knives. Was just it just felt so real to me. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just when I was watching the scene, just realizing like, again, this was the second time I watched it, and there was so many details I missed the first time I watched it because I was just super tired, and then it's just so much information. So, yeah, watching the second time when they were counting knives, completely forgot, that was even a part of it. That was there's a knife missing, and then there's a knife used to stab him.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that whole little detail was cool.
Yeah, I really liked the Richard E. Grant. Anytime he was
Yeah.
on the screen, it was big thumbs up. Maggie Smith getting more and more annoyed by Ivan Novello playing the piano is a great scene. It's like, oh, another one. Just the kind of the backhanded. It said with the right tone, it could sound quite pleasant, but from Maggie Smith, it's just dripping with acid.
Right.
Yeah.
Again, if you have access to like the DVD or the Blu-ray, I would really recommend Julian Fellows' commentary. Altman usually does good commentaries, and I don't know about his commentary on this one, but for some reason I went to the Fellows commentary, and probably because I've listened to Altman a lot, and there's so many things that, in terms of details that are brought into the movie deliberately, that he's brought in, that they're not things that you would consciously necessarily notice. Like, and one of the things with that Maggie Smith and Ivor Novello is he was like saying that these upper class people, they did not like popular entertainment. Like, to Smith's character, going to the opera or going to see a play, that would be entertainment, theater. Going to see an orchestra perform. Motion pictures, like, ugh. And you see it with the downstairs people, like Emily Watson, who we haven't talked about her much. She's got all the film stars' pictures on her wall. There's the one guy who really wants to be the footman, or he wants to take care of Ivor Novello's,
that's Higgins.
Clothes. Okay, that's Higgins.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
So that, like, his starstruck. No one in the upper, the upstairs, they're not starstruck. They don't care about movies. As the years would go on, they would not care about television.
Yeah.
And even he said, like, he's like, maybe this was recorded before he won the Oscar, but he's like, I've just written this movie, and I got nominated for an Oscar, and I have an older great aunt who said something like, "How's that play that you wrote?" Like, she was not even acknowledging like that he's just made a Hollywood movie,
Yeah.
And so, like, that is not something that I would have like consciously noticed, but then it just makes Maggie Smith's disdain for Ivor Novello all the more fun to me.
Yeah.
Like, of course she would hate him.
Yeah.
And, that other girl is like, again, she's one of the upstairs, but she's not from that much money. So she's allowed to like a film star, I think my favorite, Maggie Smith has that great line where she's like, "Tell us how it ends." None of us are going to see it.
Yeah.
But my favorite Maggie Smith moment in it, because it caused a laughing chain reaction for me when I most recently watched it, is when, after Ryan Phillippe's character has been outed, and the footman or the butler spills the coffee on his pants, and she just starts like she's sitting on the couch next to him, and she just starts cackling.
Yeah.
And it's like it's like one of the only times in the movie, I feel like, where she has a moment of joy.
Yeah.
Because she's like stressed this whole weekend, right? Because she's worried that she's the wife's aunt, right? She's worried that she's going to get her allowance cut off. That's the big thing.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I was trying to like trace the connection between her and the Gambon character, but just that moment of joy, like she started cracking up laughing, and then I started laughing, and I had to pause the movie because I was just laughing from it. But I think one of my favorite things is every time Morris Weissman makes a phone call, because he actually is kind of breaking down the movie for us in a way. If you're at least you're an American audience, where he's like telling them we have to change the script because the way we've written it is not how it really is. Like he's like shocked. He's like, we've got a Cockney maid coming in and saying funny lines. These people don't say anything. They don't talk. We have to rewrite it.
Yeah. I also was trying to figure out, I'm pretty sure that Wiseman, the producer, doesn't at no point in the movie am I sure that he actually knows a murder actually happened while he was there.
I'm gonna be thinking about that the next time I watch this, because I don't think I ever noted that.
I'm pretty sure he's on the phone when the murder happens.
Yeah.
And the next time we see him, he's still on the phone.
Yeah.
And even the inspector comes in and they're like, don't worry about him. He's an American. Ignore him. He's still on the phone. He has no idea that a murder happened, that his movie is happening in real life.
Right.
Yeah.
And he's just on the phone the whole time. And then there's no point where his character acknowledges that a murder happened.
And isn't it?
That's interesting. I didn't notice that.
Yeah, the scene that you were talking about is like where Ryan Phillippe gets the hot coffee on his trousers. Is that he comes into that scene as well and tells the footman, I'm waiting for a phone call. So can you just let me know when it comes through, like for the third time?
Right.
So he's still kind of waiting on these phone calls when all this other stuff is going on. I think, I'm definitely going to watch it like that again.
He also says when he tells, was it Kristen Scott Thomas? Is that the actress who plays like the lady of the house?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
He tells her that he needs to make a phone call later, and he's like, I'll reverse the charges, of course. And Julian Fellows is like, they would not care. Like, their relationship with money is such that him saying he would reverse the charges is like, it's like a rich person who doesn't know how much a gallon of milk costs or whatever. What's the line from Arrested Development? Like, what could it be? $10. The mother or something says something like what does this cost? $10 or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, there's something like that in there.
Yeah.
I've only seen it in memes, so I don't. But another thing that interests me, and I think we kind of touched on this, is how the secrets are kind of such that like everybody actually knows all the secrets.
Yeah.
They just can't talk about them.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a pretty interesting part where the daughter, Gambon, and I think the character's name is Isabel. It's Michael Gambon and Kristen Scott Thomas's daughter is talking to the Emily Watson character, and she's trying to get her dad to do something.
Yeah.
I think write a check to the guy who's blackmailing her or whatever, and she says something to suggest that she knows that her dad is sleeping with Emily Watson. Like, she's like, maybe you could talk to him, because you're intimate with him. And like, it's this awkward moment for Watson because it's like she's not allowed to acknowledge that with someone of that status.
Yeah.
And then, of course, even though I know it's coming, well, I guess it had been when I watched it a few weeks ago. It had been a couple of years since I've seen it. So when Emily Watson speaks up at the dinner, I gasped. You know, even though because I forgot about it.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, what, no, you know.
You dropped your salad fork.
Yes, but it's like the taboo of acknowledging it is worse than the fact that all these people are cheating on their spouses and sleeping with people, taking advantage of power. It's like everyone just accepts that happens as long as you don't break the rule of talking about it or acknowledging it the way that she did in that moment.
Yeah.
And I just think that's a very... I like the way the movie does that and the way it handles it.
Yeah. I think the whole way through, especially with that kind of dynamic, is it's setting us up for the big, quote unquote, the big reveal. Is that like everything that happens really stems from the upstairs sleeping with the downstairs. You know, we get there's a lot of that tension is there throughout. There's a lot of the scenes of like the upstairs kind of sneaking off for a quickie with the downstairs, like the he's nobody scene, and the whole time it's kind of right there in front of us, like it's telling us that this is why this is happening, but it's never explicit until Helen Mirren, who is phenomenal, gives the speech, and we kind of realize that that she had foreseen, she knew where to put it so that he would drink it.
I also think that the murder is interesting because when she goes in, what's happening. Yeah. And it's like, oh, the movie tells you when it happens that she murdered him because she's poisoning him. But
he even takes a sip and he's like, ah!
Right. Yeah. And so it's like, oh, she's the one who did it. But then there's the mystery figure sneaking in and stabbing him. So there's that is kind of interesting because you don't see that in whodunits, in mysteries or murder movies like this.
Yeah, exactly. It's normally kind of like a gimmick, but this is it's up front. But like we said, it's lost within the dialogue. It's lost within the 100 other things that are happening in the house.
Right.
It's kind of it's a perfect example of hiding in plain sight. As the viewer, if you're like craning your neck to look at something that's happening behind Helen Mirren when she does that, you're gonna miss it.
Right.
Which is, I think, therein lies the beauty of this film.
Yeah, because it's not like the murder is sensationalized either in the filmmaking style.
Yeah. I mean, it's even handled with humor. When they first kind of pull the body up and they find the knife and somebody faints, and Stephen Fry's like, "See, that's why we don't touch the body."
Yeah. Well, as any other points that anybody wants to bring up before we rate the film?
I don't think so.
I was when this came out, I was, as I've said, I was kind of getting into film at the time. And this is also, I think, like around the time that I first started following the Academy Awards.
Yeah.
And I was so sure that Robert Altman was going to win.
Best director.
Yeah. He won the Golden Globe, but I think that's the only thing he won that year for Gosford Park.
I mean, who was he up against for?
Well, he was up against a pretty stacked group. There was, of course, this was 2001, so Peter Jackson for the Fellowship of the Ring. And hold on, before I announce the winner, the winner was Ron Howard for A Beautiful Mind.
Oh.
So that was like... but who were the other two? I want to say it was David Lynch for Mulholland Drive.
Wow.
Yeah.
And this would have been the 2002 Academy Awards, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was actually a pretty good Best Director lineup because it
Mm.
was Ridley Scott for Black Hawk Down, Robert Altman for Gosford Park, Peter Jackson for Fellowship, David Lynch for Mulholland Drive, and Ron Howard for A Beautiful Mind,
Wow.
who
Yeah.
ended up winning.
Yeah, I mean, any of those, I mean, arguably, you know, maybe not Ridley Scott's best film, but
No,
still,
but
They're all
well,
iconic.
a
Yeah.
well-directed and well-crafted film.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. No one that I would have been like, what are they doing on that list?
I actually do not think A Beautiful Mind is a bad film.
Yeah.
But it's just like it is definitely the last on my list
Yeah,
of in that group. So
Wow.
So, Lewis, is this what it's really like over there?
Yeah, this is what this is the life that Chelsea and I are going to be living now. We will be
day-to-day.
downstairs.
right, you'll be
yeah.
a footman, and
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, it's quite funny. We went to there's a lot of old manor houses that are kind of part of the National Trust, which is they keep it so you can go and have a look around these old stately homes
Yeah.
and stuff. And Chelsea took some photographs of Amelia playing. They had some toys for her to play with outside, but she had positioned it so it just looked like Amelia was in front of this huge house playing with a football or whatever. And she had someone from America that was like, "Is this where you're living now?" And it was like, no, this manor house is not where we're living. It's unfortunately, part of a bygone era. But I mean, it's part of our history. This kind of went on for a long time, I believe. So, yeah, I'm sure somewhere there's still footmen, and I mean, there was a whole Frasier episode in the early 2000s where he gets a butler that's English. So it's obviously still, a trope still kind of going on, I guess.
Yeah.
But I've never come across it.
well, and in interest in it is kind of never ending because Downton Abbey, that's like a global sensation. People love that show.
Yeah.
And not that it necessarily deals with the same exact world, but The Crown is about the royal family, not this, but the popularity of The Crown. So people like watching this world unfold, and they like seeing the ins and outs and the lying and the scheming and
the dirty secrets of the upper class.
That's right. The dirty secrets of the upper class is kind of exactly it.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, it's different in America, obviously, but it feels not dissimilar to, what's going on with the writer strike and the actor strike and these out of touch executives versus
the
working class,
the hard working. Nothing would look the way it is if it wasn't for the downstairs.
Right. There was a video, I think this was during COVID, but there was a video of an actor who was doing a virtual audition, and he was auditioning from his home via Zoom. And the director had his mic off and was or his mic on and was talking about, it's I hate having to see these trashy apartments that they live in or something like that.
Oh gosh.
And so this guy's video went viral that's what people are dealing with and out of touch rich people in Hollywood versus the people who have to work.
By accident, we've managed to marry those two pretty well together, I think.
All right, let's guess what we rated the film on Letterboxd.
Yes.
Zach, I'm going to say that you gave it a heart.
Yeah.
Yes. the fall back on that old trusty prediction. I'm going to say
got
the same.
One right. Lewis, I'm going to say you rated it. I'm going to say... I'm I'm gonna say you rated it a 4.
Cool. I'm gonna say Zach, it was a heart, and Brandon, I think 3.
Am I guessing 2?
Yes.
Okay, because I think mine line up, because I think, Lewis, you gave it a 4.
Yeah.
And Brandon, I think you gave it a 3, but only after your second viewing.
Interesting caveat. Yeah. What would you have said for the first viewing?
What? Oh.
Maybe a 2. I don't know. I don't know how big of a leap, but
yeah.
But well, I think there's definitely a different star rating from your first viewing to your second viewing.
Yeah.
Well, you are both correct. I did give it a 4. And like I said, I think that once I go back and watch it, it will increase once I'm not guessing who done it. What about you, Bram?
Wait, so you rated it what? Sorry,
a 4.
People were texting me.
A 4.
Okay, so I was right.
Yes, you were.
You guys are right as well. Except I didn't really rate it the first time because it was literally like, so I watched like half of the movie and I was just like so dead and like I cannot get through this right now. And I was watching it with my sister and I was like, I'm gonna go to bed. And so I started to turn it off and she was like, I was like, you're like into it?
Yeah.
So I like turned it back on and set back down and actually didn't fall asleep.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It was such a like detached watch that I couldn't actually give you a rating.
Yeah.
I was just not there.
Yeah, that happens.
But yeah, no, 3 on the second one. But I don't think it's a bad movie. It just wasn't for me necessarily.
Yeah.
So, but I think I will watch it again, and I would like to kind of do an Altman
season.
Marathon. Yeah.
Altman season on Film Church.
Maybe. Yeah. Might be a good one.
That's a lot of movies.
Yeah.
Maybe we could pick and choose.
You gotta do decades.
Yeah, you could just do Altman in the 70s.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I was gonna bring this up earlier, but then I think my brain went somewhere else, and I made a different point. Alfred Hitchcock was instrumental in Altman's career because Hitchcock saw his first feature, The Delinquents, and liked it and hired him to direct a few episodes of Alfred Hitchcock Presents.
Oh,
so a few of his earliest actual TV jobs were Alfred Hitchcock Presents because he said there's potential in this guy. So
that's great. Yeah, that's exactly what a TV show like that should be used for. To give,
right.
To give people a stepping stone. That's awesome.
Sweet.
I have no idea how to guide someone into Altman of where to go next.
Yeah. I think just
Popeye.
Yes.
I think Popeye's a good movie.
And it's interesting to me for the film that Shelley Duvall filmed after The Shining.
Mm-hmm.
To go from The Shining to Popeye is incredible. So that's why it's on my watch list.
I actually think if you pull up Altman's director credits on Letterboxd, where they're sorted by popularity, that's not a bad order to start tackling him, because his most popular film on there is The Long Goodbye, which is a really good movie. and I kind of veer people away from starting with MASH, not because MASH is bad, but MASH is definitely one of those movies that certain attitudes are different today. So a lot of people are disturbed by sexism in the film. And a lot of people go into it and feel that it's kind of, they're uncomfortable with it.
Yeah.
And they don't see what's so great about it. And I think that part of that is just it really is like the difference of the times,
Yeah.
of what people were angry about in 1970 versus how people direct their anger at institutions today is a little different. So I think that people saw the sexism differently because of who. There's a woman character in that film who receives a lot of ridicule from the main characters, but she's also like an army brat who like tries to get them fired, like tries to get them arrested,
Yeah.
because she's like, you have to follow the other. So in 1970, people would see her as like a bootlicker and an ass kisser. And I don't think people necessarily see that today, especially if you watch the show, where the characters are softened heavily, and even the characters that are not necessarily villains, but the unlikable characters in the movie become sort of like funny antagonists in the show, you know? So people who are fans of the show have a really hard time usually going back to the movie. But because, and the thing is like I don't want people to watch MASH and then go, I'm done with Altman, because his 70s work is just pretty out there and pretty great. A lot of it.
Awesome.
And the films that were less popular in the 70s seem to have kind of bubbled to the top in terms of popularity. They've sort of been discovered by a new audience, and people are like, this is really good. I can't believe audiences didn't respond to this when it came out, you know? So yeah, The Long Goodbye is good. Especially, this is also a weird movie, Gosford Park, because Altman, when I think of Altman, I think of Americana. His movies are very, very American. Like, he's rooted in American iconography. And so it's kind of weird to jump in with this British film.
Yeah.
Well, I've added a few to my watch list, so I'm sure in future weeks there'll be a few ticking off.
Cool.
Speaking of ticking off things in future weeks, what the heck are we watching next week?
Well, seeing as I've been away for a while, I thought I'm just going to hit reset and do the biggest Lewis pick that's ever been picked. We talked about it last time that I was on the show before I took my hiatus. Brandon, I'm going to make you watch City Lights from 1931.
Okay.
The Charlie Chaplin film.
Nice.
One of my all-time favorites. I'm in need of a good cry, and I want you to see it. So next week we'll be watching City Lights from 1931.
Crying together.
Can I tell you something that might make you wince, but speaks to the power of City Lights?
Please.
There was a period of my life where I was between apartments, and I was hopping from sort of couch to couch when I first moved to Austin. And I didn't have a computer. I only had a phone. And I started going to a coffee shop and just using their Wi-Fi to watch movies on my phone. So the first time I ever saw City Lights, I watched it on an iPhone, which is actually much smaller than the one that I have now. You know, this is a 2012 or 2013. So that's the part that would make you wince, is the first time I saw. But shit, if I wasn't sitting in that coffee shop with tears running down my face. You can, even watching it on an iPhone for the first time. I was like, oh, damn. Yeah. That was a good movie.
Well, dang.
So yeah.
I'm in for a tearjerker, I guess. If I don't cry now.
Uh-oh.
Then, what does that say about me?
I set the standard.
I'm just kidding.
Well, it's being brought to the table. So it's going to be good, Bran. You're going to love it.
Yes. I know. Well, sweet. That'll be next week. Back to regularly scheduled programming. Lewis broadcasting from his new place in the UK.
That's right.
And, yeah. But that brings us to the end of the show. Of course, you can find us on social media at Film Church Radio, and you can follow us individually on Letterboxd. I am at Selmascope. Lewis is at WalkerLewis3007 to keep up with what we've been watching. We also have all of our back episodes streaming on all good podcast platforms. Please leave us a rating and review so that we know if you liked the film, and if you didn't, what you would pick for us to watch in the future. Thank you again, Zach, for bringing us this film. And
thank you for inviting me into the church.
It's always
and also all the great information as well, which is just adds more context to the film, which is much appreciated.
Yes.
There's another podcast that I occasionally listen to that deals with film, and they use a phrase that I really like because that's probably the reason I listen to them. They refer to themselves as connoisseurs of context.
Yeah.
And that is like the bread and butter. Is like I love the context of of a movie. You know, I love all that stuff. So I'm happy to provide.
Perfect.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody else, for being here, and we will see you next Sunday for more Film Church Radio. The only thing left to say is,
Constable, I'm glad I've caught you. I'm assuming that the inspector won't keep everyone behind tomorrow, but I thought I'd check with you.
Well, we haven't spoken to all the servants.
There you are, Dexter. Come along, we're going home.
I was just asking the constable how long our guests will be staying. Only Miss Croft has the meals to arrange, and one of the housemaids is anxious to get away.
Oh, that'll be all right. I'm not bothered about the servants, just the people who might have had a real connection with the dead man.
Sweet. That was terrible. Yeah, that was probably the worst British accent I've ever done. I might redo that in private.
Do it.
Oh.
Yeah.
And scene.
That's it.
Amen.
Amen.
Oh yeah. Amen.
Amen.